Not all writers can pinpoint the moment that started it all, but for Stephen Womack, it was reading All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren that sparked the first draft of his first book. And while that first idea never got published, a lot of his novels have. That includes a detective series set here in Nashville. In the 1990s, Steve got the chance to start teaching at Watkins School of Art, Design, and Film. And his latest book is what he calls a highly subjective account of his 25 years there. Watkins started as the Watkins Institute way back in 1885. It moved locations several times before settling into Metro Center north of downtown, and finally merging with Belmont University. 5 years ago, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, the school held its final commencement, socially distanced, of course. Here is Lauren Hood, then director of the Media Center, invoking the school's founder during that ceremony.
The Institute, he wrote, is intended for individuals who grow dissatisfied with the endless ways of squandering time, who wish to sharpen their thinking power, who struggle to escape an intellectual rut, trained to attain vocational competence, and recognize education as the avenue to enriched living. He called Watkins a monument to discontent, for how it stood for those who, by choosing education, refused predetermined lives. Today, you join a long line of launched individuals who in Watkins' 135 years have included immigrants in the early 20th century, soldiers after world wars, women as they joined the workforce, all told, more than 350,000 people.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Can you remember the first meaningful story you read as a kid that kind of set you on this course as a writer?
Yeah. My parents encouraged me to read probably Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain. I read Twain. I read Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. I read, and I've still got it, a small kid's book version of Edgar Allan Poe stories. So, yeah.
So you still have this little volume of Poe?
Yeah, I've still got several of the books that I had when I was a kid.
Was it scary to you at the time?
Oh, yeah, but I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
You started your first novel, though, I read, at age 18.
Yeah, I had, that's a story. In the 60s, I wound up getting a scholarship to an all-boys boarding school in Ohio. And after I graduated from Western Reserve Academy in Hudson, Ohio, where a teacher, an English teacher of ours, forced us to read Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men. And that's the book that made me want to write. To this day, I think it's one of the great underrated novels of the 20th century. It's an incredible, great American novel, and there was something different. I came out of the back end of that book a different person, and I stayed in Hudson. I wanted to take a little time off. I wanted to take a gap year before I started college, but I had two things I was worried about. The first was the draft. It was 1970. I wasn't particularly keen to go to Vietnam. And then the other thing is that I had to get a job, and I got a job in a factory in northern Ohio, and there is nothing that will get you in college faster than a factory job. So,
yeah, the alternative being the line.
The factory line. And I worked the 3 to 11 shift, which meant I could sleep late in the morning and there was still time to go out and get a beer afterwards. And I just sat down one night and started scribbling away, and 3 years later had a 600-page novel.
And what was the plot, and who were the characters?
It was so long ago. The book was never published. I haven't looked at it in geez, 40 years. I do have a copy of it in a filing cabinet somewhere. But
Typed on onion skin, right?
Yeah, typed and with carbon copies and all that stuff. And I think it was the story of it was a terrible book. I mean, thank God it was never published. That would have been at the end of everything. But it was the story about a disaffected young man in cultural upheaval who sets off. It was kind of an on the road kind of homage to that kind of thing.
Well, that's appropriate for the first novel.
For the first time out, yeah.
Mysteries and thrillers seem to be your vibe, though.
I didn't set out to do that. I went to Tulane, and I was a newspaper reporter in New Orleans back in the days when New Orleans had 3 daily newspapers. Now they don't have any. It's all online. But I worked for the smallest and worst of those 3 newspapers. But it was great training. And it was a time in Louisiana when Edwin Edwards was governor for the first time. Moon Landrieu was the mayor. So I was just immersed in New Orleans and Louisiana politics. And I wanted to write this novel set in New Orleans. And I did, and it was a story of politics, corruption, backstabbing in Louisiana politics. And years later, when I finally sold the book, and it took 12 years to sell it, when St. Martin's Press published it, it was called Murphy's Fault. And they subtitled it Murphy's Fault, a Mystery. And I went, what? It wasn't really a mystery to me. But the book did okay, and St. Martin's wanted another book from me. And my editor said, this time, put more mystery elements in it. And I said, okay, anything you say. And I went out and read a bunch of mysteries so I know what to do.
You've got a Music City series also that features a PI. Who is that guy based on?
You can't write a series like that without having at least part of yourself in it. But he's an amalgam of a bunch of different people that I met over the years. One of the things I was trying to do, and it probably worked against my career, but I wasn't looking for a larger than life Jack Reacher kind of, superhero kind of guy. I was looking for somebody who was a little more ordinary, somebody who was a little more realistic, but yet who underneath had some kind of reserve of backbone or determination or something. And that's what Harry James Denton is. He's, if nothing else, dogged. He never gives up. And so that's where he came from, just kind of a composite.
When you start writing a continuing series, did you know that would be a series?
I hoped it would be. And this was 1994 when the book came out, and I was living in an apartment complex on Murfreesboro Road, and my editor called me one day and said, I've got some news for you. And I said, okay. And he said, your book's been nominated for an Edgar. And I went, oh, what's that? And I didn't know what that meant. And then a few months later, they flew me to New York City for the Edgars, and the book won. And so they won. My editor at Valentine Random House, he wanted to turn it into a series, and I went, let's go, let's run with it.
How hard is that to come up with new adventures, new things for that guy to do?
Not hard at all. I mean, you're just, if you're open to the universe and just listen to what's going around you. People say, where do you get your ideas? I said, getting ideas is not the hard part. Figuring out which ones to pursue and work on, that's the hard part. So, I tell people the 4th book in the series, which is the darkest in many ways. I've been reading a lot of Raymond Chandler and some other dark stuff, Andrew Vox and people like that. I was driving to work. I lived in New York City and worked in publishing, and I came back to Nashville, and I went to work for Thomas Nelson Publishers, which is the world's largest commercial Bible publisher.
People, yeah.
Yes, and I worked in publishing. I worked in art departments. I was never an editor. And so I'm driving to work one day, and I see a billboard off 2nd Avenue and I-40 that says, "World's largest adult bookstore, exit here." And that billboard was there for decades.
Yep, I remember.
And I thought to myself, I just passed a billboard advertising the world's largest adult bookstore, and I'm on my way to work at the world's largest Bible publisher. And I went, that's a story. That's a story. And that's what it turned into a book that's now called Nobody's Chain Lays Straight, which was a quote from one of my inmate writers at the Tennessee State Penitentiary.
Ooh, who's that?
He published a novel, Bill Elliott, and I taught creative writing at the old Tennessee State Penitentiary for 4 years.
The castle-looking one.
At the Walls, yeah,
Walls,
they call
yeah.
it the Walls, yeah. I was there for 4 years, till they closed it.
Did you encounter James Earl Ray?
No, he was at Brushy Mountain.
He was at the Walls for a while.
Was he at the
but yeah.
Walls for a while? No, I never saw him. Never ran into any famous criminals out there, but it was an adventure. It was an adventure.
There's probably a book in that, too.
Do you know, there may be. There were about a half a dozen guys that worked with me consistently and regularly, and then people would come and go. And one of them published 4 or 5 books. One of them published a novel with a mainstream New York press. Bill Elliott published a novel called Hard Guy, a real dark, noirish crime thriller. And then I had another fellow who published, he loved cats, and he published articles in cat magazines. And of course, a lot of people don't know this, but the Walls was overrun with feral cats. There were just hundreds of them that wandered around in the yard. And nobody bothered them. Some of the inmates adopted them as pets, but I think they kept the rodent population down.
Probably did. It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Well, we are here to talk about a book of a different kind, a memoir. I mean, something that really happened in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Death of a College.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, and I tried to make this clear in the beginning of the piece. That's what it is. It's a memoir. This isn't reportage. It's not journalism. It's not history. This is a deeply subjective account of the 25 years I spent at Watkins.
But there's a good chunk of history in there. Tell us a little bit about the founding of Watkins.
Well, Watkins is was actually, I believe, the second oldest college in Nashville. It was founded about 12 years after Vanderbilt, and it came about as the legacy of Samuel Watkins. Now, Samuel Watkins was an orphan, self-educated, had no formal education, but he was very hardworking, very enterprising, and he made a fortune selling bricks to the Union Army during the Civil War. And when he died, I think it was 1883, because Watkins was formed in 1885, he was reportedly the richest man in Nashville. And he left $100,000 and a lot at the corner of 6th and Church and said, build a school. He wanted to make education available to people who might otherwise not be able to attain it. And that was Watkins' mission up till the day it closed. Our demographic, our student body was a different group of people. And sometimes that could be challenging, and sometimes it was wonderful. But Watkins started in 1885. It struggled around for a few years in search of itself, but eventually grew to be incredibly successful. And I have deep family ties to Watkins. My grandmother went to Watkins 100 years ago in the 1920s.
To study what?
She took home economics classes there. They did a lot of those kind of classes. Watkins, it was originally not a college. It was more of a secondary school and a trade school. So you took home economics. You could take typing. You could work on your high school education. Where Watkins really exploded was in the post-World War II era. In 1943, the War Department created the GED, the General Equivalency Diploma, so that soldiers could finish their high school diplomas while they were in the Army. And then when they got out of the Army, at one point, Watkins had nearly 5,000 students. And most of them were returning GIs pursuing their education under the GI Bill. And it was gangbusters. Watkins early on, I forgot the guy's name, but I quoted in the memoir, in the early 1900s, Watkins' focus gradually moved around toward art, visual art. And we hired our first art teacher, and then that's what Watkins largely became known for just decades after that. And eventually, the adoption of the GED, which gave Watkins so many students in the post-war era, it started to work against Watkins in that GED programs blew up everywhere. You could go anywhere.
You didn't have to just go there.
You didn't have to go downtown at night to go to Watkins and get your GED. So, and then by the 70s and the 80s, Watkins was starting to have problems with attendance and recruiting students. The building they were in, I don't know if you remember this, but 6th and Church, it was 3 or 4 stories, and 2 stories was the Woolworths building, the Woolworths department store. That was Woolworths' downtown anchor. And then Watkins had the upper floors above it. And that's how Watkins was surviving on the lease. And Samuel Watkins outlined this in his will. He wanted a 4-story building, a basement, a street-level floor that would be rented out to subsidize the college, which would be on 2 floors above that. So by the 90s, though, Watkins was in real trouble.
Well, no one was going downtown to shop, particularly at a dime store.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people who move to Nashville now and see what a vibrant, intensely busy, overwhelming downtown we have now would have a hard time imagining. But 35, 40 years ago, downtown was dead at night. There was nothing going on. It was a ghost town. And, I wrote in the book that we taught, most classes were taught at night because people had jobs during the day. And we would go out at night and at 9:30 or 10 o'clock after classes, and we would walk in groups to our cars because it was kind of scary.
Yeah. When you got, recruited, did you think you'd stay as long as you did?
Had absolutely no intention of staying that long. And I outlined this in the memoir. Sometimes, I never applied for a job there. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever applied for a job that I've actually gotten over the years. But in the early 90s, 1993, 1994, I had the chance to write my first movie. I got my first movie credit, which was a very small movie, but it was the first film shown on the Nashville network. It was Lori Morgan's, I believe, only movie. She wanted to get into the movies, and she did this movie called Proud Heart, and a fellow named Jack Cole directed it. And it was an interesting experience. But the Scene did an article about it, and I got a call one day. This is back when everybody was still in the white pages, and it was a fellow named David Hinton, and he said that he had read the article about the Scene, and could he take me to lunch? He wanted to talk. Sure, sounds interesting. So we met at a restaurant in the Village, and he introduced himself. He had moved here to Nashville from Iowa to get his doctorate in higher education at Vanderbilt. And he had completed his doctorate. He was a film, and to this day is a film fanatic, a film historian. But David and I became good friends, and we've remained friends to this day. I had coffee with him last week. And he got a job at first teaching at Watkins. And then when Watkins was struggling to become a real college, they hired a president. They needed a dean, and Madeline Reed, who was taught art at Watkins for over 30 years, wonderful woman, beloved teacher at Watkins, and she encouraged David to apply for the dean's job, and he got it. And he and everybody else who was hired, they were hired with the mission of saving Watkins because it was about to go under.
Yeah.
And David had the idea to start a film school, and made it work. At the time, there were no film schools in the state of Tennessee. There were film majors, but there were no production-oriented film programs. Watkins was the first. And in 1995, he offered me a job. I had been teaching screenwriting at what was then Nashville-set Technical Institute. It's now Nashville State Community College. I taught as an adjunct there. I taught in continuing ed at TSU, teaching screenwriting. And I took the job as an adjunct, stayed there for 4 years. The school grew so much, they needed a full-time screenwriting teacher. They offered me the job, and I was there another 21 years.
And it had a variety of locations. I had forgotten that it was at 100 Oaks
Yes.
at one point.
Yeah. The facility at 6th and Church was really run down, really small. We needed to move. And at that time, Phil Bredesen was mayor, and he really wanted to revitalize the downtown. So there had been an attempt before with the Church Street Mall.
Yep, Church Street Center.
The Church Street Center. Did it last a decade? I'm not sure it made it that long.
It's the library now, in case folks are wondering, yeah.
Yeah, they tore down the Church Street Center and expanded it. So the city bought Watkins Building and property, so we had to get out. And we were scrambling around trying to find a place. There was some talk that we'd take the old Free Will Baptist Bible College, and we were actually excited about that because they had dorms and a gym and swimming pools and all that. But that campus was in such bad shape that we didn't have the money to buy it and rehab it. So that fell through. As I outlined in the book, there was an attempt to get us at 5 Points in East Nashville, some discussion of a location out on Nolensville Road. And finally, we rented what is a building next door to the 100 Oaks, next door to the Home Depot in 100 Oaks. It's a Staples now. And we were there for several years until we moved into, and I think this was 2000, we moved into the former home of the AMC 14 at Fountain Square, which was Nashville's first multiplex theater.
I know, and that was so appropriate.
It worked. It really worked well.
You guys had a real theater.
We gutted the building all the way to the studs, except for one theater that we preserved. So the theater that you were at for the Student Emmy Awards, for instance, that was an original AMC 14 theater, and it was sacred to us. It was our equivalent of church.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is writer and former Watkins Film School instructor Stephen Womack. We'll be right back. It didn't take long to get some pretty talented students.
Oh, yeah.
And film students were doing what film students will. They were pushing the envelope.
Oh, yes.
Talk to me about the one film that kind of caused a PR storm.
Well, and this, I outlined it in some detail in the book. When the Gulf War started, when George W. Bush took us to war, there wasn't, Watkins was, we were art students. It was still largely a commuter campus. Students weren't terribly interested in politics or news or the war because they were all wrapped up in their own work. But over time, that war, if you remember, became fairly unpopular after a while. It was badly handled. And, you had the picture of George Bush on the aircraft carrier with the
Mission
banner,
accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Well, the war went on for another 18 years after that, so I don't think we were quite mission accomplished yet. So our students began to get politicized, and we had 2 students who did a student film that was a political piece on that war, and it contained combat footage from the Iraqi war, interspersed with commercials for household cleaning products, and it was like mass culture and the war and all this awful stuff going on. But the worst part was, and I'll tell you, Demetria, I've seen over my years as a newspaper reporter and just as a human being living on the planet, I've seen some pretty awful stuff. I've never seen anything like this. There was in the Netherlands, there was a sort of dark web, underground website called ogrish.com. It's not there anymore. But they displayed or showed footage that would never get on the news any other way. And they had film of an American contractor who'd been taken hostage by terrorists, and they filmed themselves beheading this guy. And the footage was on the web, available for everybody. So our students zapped it down and mixed it in with their film. And it was cutting edge. I mean, it was a political piece that really worked, but it was a public relations disaster. And Jim Brooks, who was president of the college then, he had retired from MTSU, and David Hinton, was the dean. They tried. I mean, this contractor's family, it made AP, it made national news. Their student film did, and boy, it got some bad publicity. The family threatened to sue us, and the administration at Watkins tried to handle it as best they could, but you just can't get that genie back in the bottle once that's out there.
Yeah.
So we were involved in some pretty serious fundraising efforts. We had our first capital campaign going on. That ended. We had some very wealthy donors in Nashville lined up to support us. We were on the precipice of a real breakout, and that ended after that.
Did those students stay, leave?
Yeah,
Do you remember?
No, they stayed. They graduated. Yeah. They're still around, and but David Hinton, that was as a series of other events and other things, he eventually resigned as dean of Watkins and moved on, became the dean at the Art Institute of Tennessee, and is still teaching. He's still teaching now.
Well, as a filmmaker and a teacher of filmmaking and a writer, we're supposed to be provocative.
Yes.
That was a teaching moment, certainly.
It was. And to Jim and David's great credit, they did not attempt to censor anything. I mean, they tried to explain that, the free expression of ideas, the exchange of ideas, pushing that envelope is essential to an arts education and to an art educational institution that's trying to do what Watkins was trying to do. And but it got a lot of bad pushback at the time.
The story of this school has a little bit of everything. It's got characters, it's got conflict, it's certainly got tension, and it has a surprise ending of sorts. Writing it, putting it all together, reliving it, did you look at the events differently?
I did. And I did a lot of, I guess for lack of a better term, soul searching. Was there anything I could have done different? The surprise ending, of course, was in January of 2020, 5 years ago, when the announcement was made that the college was merging with Belmont, and they tried to present it as a merger, two financial institutions merging.
Not the end of something and the beginning of something else. But,
right.
Yeah.
But in fact, Watkins was, as I explained in the book, out of money. We couldn't make payroll, couldn't pay the electric bill, couldn't pay the the health insurance bill, and so the merger with Watkins was, frankly, desperate attempt to at least preserve something of the institution's legacy and history and their name. But I've gone back many times in my, and as I mentioned, I was the first film faculty member hired at the film school. Not because, as I explained in the book, not because I was anything special. If you teach cinematography, you need some expensive cameras. If you teach editing, you need an expensive editing bay. Watkins didn't have any money. If you're going to teach screenwriting, as I said, all you need is a blackboard.
Yeah.
So I was able to teach screenwriting with a very little expenditure of money. And when the college's last commencement took place 5 years ago next month, we had a couple of students who just needed like one class to graduate, and we couldn't leave them hanging. So they paid me to stay there and do a couple of independent studies to get these students graduated. So I was kind of the last guy out the door. And I can remember going over there to the building when they were literally emptying it out. And we found this room that we didn't know existed, and it was full of Watkins merchandise. And it turns out, sweatshirts and hoodies and sweatpants and sunglasses and ball caps that they gave away to prospective students. But at the end, there were so few prospective students that this stuff was just in a closet. So, my daughter's got Watkins hoodies and, and I sleep in a pair of Watkins sweatpants right now. So, but I think there were a couple of pivotal moments in the last decade at Watkins where one choice or another might have ended differently. I think, but in the end, art colleges all across the country, small private art colleges that don't have $1 billion in endowment, are in deep trouble. And I gave a list at the end of the books of art colleges that have closed since the COVID pandemic. And like 70 colleges have closed in the last 5 years. And that's not counting the 59 Art Institute campuses that went under.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you're a dad. It's understandable if a family's going to invest in an education, that anything in the arts is a crapshoot.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And we had parents who would say, how can we justify spending this much money on an art degree? And, the kids, the students, that was their passion. That's what they wanted to do. And of course, when you're 17, 18 years old, you're not thinking ahead to when you're going to retire. You're thinking about living life to the fullest at that point in your life. And we encourage that. But there were moments that were really poignant, that were really painful. I had students, I relate the story of a graduating senior, and in one class we took up, what are you going to do after graduation? Just kicking around ideas. And this one guy said, I'm really worried. He said, I've got 6 figures of student loan debt, and I don't know how I'm ever going to pay it off. I guess my kids will have to pay it off. And I just, without thinking, I looked at him and said, what makes you think you're ever going to be able to afford kids? You know? And that was not a very nice thing to say, and I didn't mean it to be cruel. But that was my first thought. I mean, I know what it takes to raise kids. And, saddling 6 figures of student loan debt on top of that, it's a tough road.
Did the teaching make you a better writer?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it made me a less productive writer because I didn't have time
Right.
or energy. As I noted, I took the full-time teaching job because I thought, it's teaching. I'll have summers off. I'll have 3 weeks off at Christmas, and I teach my classes, and I can still maintain a writing career. In the decade before I started teaching full-time, I published 9 novels. In the decade after that, I published 2. It's teaching, it's mission creep. Every time you turn around, there's something else you're being asked to do. And, I've spent 5 years as chair of the Watkins Film School. And that's the most, and my colleague, Valerie Stover-Quarles, who's on the faculty at Belmont now, she did it for 12 years. And I'm staggered. I don't know how anybody does this job for 12 years. And I love teaching students. I love the energy, but it made it tougher to be a writer in some respects.
You've got another book coming out, though. Plug it as we finish here.
Okay. It's a serial killer novel called Blood Plot. It's a dark book. It's an edge-of-your-seat thriller. I was really happy with the way it turned out. Probably not going to write a book like that again. So
Keep you up at night?
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Steve Haruch. Original music by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Our last question is in the fishbowl. It's your choice.
Just grab one?
Yep.
Okay.
It's been posed by someone who sat in that seat before. Give it a try.
Oh, do I tell who it's from? Oh, this is exciting. It's from Phil Bredesen. If you were
granted the right to go back and talk to yourself as a 16-year-old, what would you tell yourself?
What would I tell myself? Learn to say no. Learn to say no. I'm not always real good at setting boundaries. I'm not always real good at turning things down, because you want to cooperate with people. You want to be supportive. You want to be positive. I wish I had learned earlier on to say no.